Welcome, everybody. This is Hugh Massey, the chairman and founder of DNA Behavior, and I'd like to welcome you to our next episode in the Behavioral Economics Today podcast. And in these podcasts, we are having conversations with global specialists in the area of behavioral economics. Some of them are doing some outstanding pioneering work at the intersection of psychology and economics. And we want to explore, the research, the data, the practical life stories. And so today I'm very fortunate to have with me Juan De Rus, who is the CEO of Neovantis. He's also a professor at the IE Business School in Spain. And so we're going to get a Spanish perspective on human behavior and really dive into, I think why this is exciting for me is to really dive into the humanizing of data. So welcome, Juan De Rus. So would you just like to start a little bit on, your background journey to getting into behavioral economics and founding Neovantis and the path you're, going on there?
Okay, so thank you very much, Hugh, for having me here. It's an honor. And yeah, I will give you some of the historical facts about how we arrived here. I first of all, I joined Novantas in 2008, so it was already there, and I when I joined, we were not that much on behavioral science, but then a couple of years later, I started reading some of the books everybody knows here, Predictively Rational by Dan Ariely, Thinking Fast and Slow, by Daniel Kahneman, also some neuroscience as biology, nudge, influence. I started reading this stuff. And at the company, we thought that all these findings could be interesting for the consulting business, that we were doing at this moment. So we started applying some of these behavioral science principles in some of the current projects we were having, more focusing influence and persuasion in banking, insurance, etc. So we saw that these principles, this way of approaching consulting was good. We were having some results. So I decided to go to London School of Economics, and I studied a master in behavioral science there in 2016. From 2016 to 2018. And I would say that from that moment onwards, the market, at least here in Spain and also in Europe, started to be more interesting. I would say after the pandemic, more or less, the market started to grow here. We already had the some of the knowledge because we have been applying this for almost 10 years at this moment, and also a certification of having some of the people in the team studying, being specific behavioral scientists. And then I also started teaching marketing and behavioral science in different business schools at university, as you were mentioning at the beginning. So this is like the summary of my story in behavioral science.
Yeah, it's a good journey and obviously a progressive one. So just to dive into the Behavioral Economics Guide article that you wrote on what lies behind our behavior, do you want to just talk a little bit more about what lies behind our behavior? Because it's more than just the raw data that's been traditionally gathered.
Yeah, no, I would like to thank the co-authors, Miguel, Olympia, and Emma as well in the article, because they did a great research about some of the topics we are mentioning there. Regarding why the topic, why what lies behind behavior, and why additional data is needed, I think this is also related with the journey we had in consulting, because we were usually using the social demographic structured data, that self-reported information in order to make decisions or in order to understand decisions, and then give solutions. Like 14, 15 years ago, we started thinking that this was not enough. And then we incorporated like unstructured information there, thinking that it was enough. So we started with speech mining, analyzing calls that the customers were making to to companies, to customer care, to sales departments, etc. And this was good because we could find a little bit more information behind behavior that only the self-reported information and the social demographic info that we have. But still not enough because now we had more information. Now you don't have a satisfaction of only 6% of people answering surveys. Now you have direct observation of all people calling and whether they are happy or not, but we still didn't know why this happiness. No, what was behind this attitude that the client was having after the call on after whatever behavior. So this is why we started thinking about how could we incorporate behavioral insights to all this data that we already have. And this is why we started talking about the behavioral data concept, in which you say, okay, it's not just enough to have structured information, even unstructured information, but you need to read this information with behavioral lens. So if somebody is having this good experience there, it has been activated the reciprocity principle, that was coined by Cialdini. And this reciprocity principle is what it is explaining why this person is buying 3 days afterwards, when you are calling. So I think that what we are trying to do and what we try to expose in the article is that we don't need, it's not that we need additional data of the one we already have, it's that we need to read the data with behavioral lens and understanding the shortcuts, and biases that the human being has.
So yeah, so the way I interpreted that out of your article was, how do we apply scientific techniques, if you want to call it that,
Mm-hmm.
and analytical techniques to understand motivation better?
Exactly.
So that if we can understand motivation, then we know more about why someone's taking action. And I think what you've just said is that it's not necessarily about having more data. It's about then being able to look at the particular data uh, that's there in a different way, to look up for different cues. For example, how many times someone's hit a website, or how many times did someone call up, or as you just said then, how long do they take to make a decision after a phone call. If that data has been gathered, I suppose the interesting thing that I'm finding is the data has to be there though, and I imagine you come across that problem as well.
Yeah, no, it is a very important point, and thank you for summarizing this because exactly I think there are a double criteria here. First of all, we need to have data in order to interpret which are the motivations, and this is the first step. But sometimes the data is already there, and this is what I insist on, in many conversations, because you say, hey, we already have some data that could give us very valuable information, and we are not using it. So, and for example, there may be many examples, but because what it is curious for me is that everybody's convinced that emotions and motivations are the key for behavior, and we have research, about anticipated emotions, immediate emotions, integral emotions, incidental emotions that spill over and then are driving the behavior, but then we don't measure them, and this is what we say, hey, there are cues, but then we do surveys. And when you are buying whatever, we do a survey and we say, hey, which has been the main motivator of this behavior? Why have you bought this BMW or this Audi? And you say, well, a German engine, a very safe car, it has space, and you are not saying, that you wanted to show off, going to your hometown and showing your neighbors, that you have been promoted, and it have been this emotional cue, the one that has ruined the behavior, but you are not reporting this in the survey and in the data that the companies are using for this. So I think that the main point here is that the information needs to be there, and I agree. But sometimes, the information is there, but we are not reading it with this behavioral lens that we
Yeah,
need.
I think in some cases enough of it's there to do something to get a better picture, and we could always structure the data better or gather more and better data to do an even better job. And I suppose if organizations see that the benefit coming from early pilot studies and analysis, that they're going to that there's now a motivation for them to invest in the cost, um,
I hope so. Yeah.
to do better. And so what about the observational and experimental data? Is it which is a better path to be going down there? For data and the use of it.
Yeah, this is. I would say that there is a trade-off here because and me working both in academia and in consulting, I see both sides of the
Yeah.
of the story. So I think in academia, we are very focused on internal validity, and everything is it should be. It should has great internal validity and obsessed with p-values and with all this stuff, which is fine. And then in consulting, and I say we again, we are very focused on external validity. And I think historically, consulting has not paid attention to some rigorous studies that could be done with real internal validity there. So which is the right path? I would say a mix of both there. So, okay, internal validity, of course, is crucial, but sometimes, we live in a reality in which it is very, very hard to do a randomized control trial. And you say, okay, maybe a quasi experiment here could be something to be done.
And one of the problems with the academic path can be is that it too is only a model, and its accuracy or reliability is dependent on the model and the circumstances of that model and what it's designed to measure. And you need other sources of information as well to create a picture that might be more contextually uh, relevant.
Yeah, no, I think the concept of context, I think, is key here. Here, what you were saying, context matters. This is the first sentence I heard when I arrived at London School of Economics.
Yeah.
There, and and then and then something which is relevant as well is that, of course, we would love, to do these peer experiments, but as you are saying, then the context is complex. And for example, we work a lot with uh, call centers and branches, and they are in different geographies, with different heads, and you need to run an experiment, and you need to understand that maybe you cannot do, two perfect randomized groups, and you need to run a quasi experiment into regions, and maybe these two regions are not exactly the same to the two regions you are having as a control, but it is the best you can do to have a balance between this internal and external validity, and out of the external validity, the ecological validity, the one you were talking about, that is not only that it serves you to another context, but also, to the real world that is the one we are living in.
And I think some data is better than none, and
Exactly.
running the breadth of experiments, and the more you do, the more you'll see where there will be a consistent trait or indicator or factor that will
Exactly.
consistently turn up that allows you to have the conclusion. So yeah, so I think that's uh, good, and for behavioral economics to move forward, data is really the area we've got to work on, because that then leads to personalization, which is really what I'm all about. Is how do we put a tailor-made suit on every person? Well, every person's different, and the data around them is different.
Exactly. No, and then as with all the problems we have had as behavioral scientists, with all the replication crisis now, and everybody challenging the discipline, saying, "Hey, yeah, this was great in the lab, but we have been trying to replicate some of these principles outside, and we have not been able to do so." So I think we need more, external validity as behavioral scientists as well.
Yeah, I think that my perception is that behavioral economics has been, it's had an evolution where it was very much around biases, um, and nudge, if you want to call it that, but it's sort of very one size fits all approach. So, while we've had, uh, uh, highly acclaimed people come up with the research and the theory that comes from the research, it's then been applied. Well, everybody has over optimism, if they say this, or um, you know have regret, but what or loss aversion, but we don't have it at the same levels. Um, we're all different, and I think that's what we've got to learn to do, is to recognize that the biases and the behavior show up differently for different people. And I think what you're uncovering and you were bringing out really well in the behavioral economics guide article is motivation's a big factor. And I think that's my sort of stepping stone to asking you about the research study that you did around Airbnb, um, hosts, the people putting up their houses for rent. So maybe you wanted just to share a little bit more about that, because I think there was an interesting outcome out of that research. Maybe you'd like to share.
Yeah, no, and I just wanted to mention what you were saying about the universal approach of behavioral science. I would say that even we need a step that is not one to one. It's even country by country. There are some examples in which we have tried as behavioral scientists to put a solution, in one country to another country, and then the output is completely different. And this is something, for example, remember that with the organ donations, with the defaulting organ donations, we that when you have an opt out, the donation of organs increase substantially. And then when we have been trying to do this in the Netherlands, the results has been not as in the other countries, because they consider themselves as more libertarians, and probably the default option, in a more libertarian approach is not working as well as in a more paternalistic approach. So I would say not only going one to one, is even when we jump from country to country, from culture to culture, we also need to consider this.
Yeah, I think we can't make I think what we're saying is you can't make an assumption as to what happens in
Exactly.
Spain
Exactly.
will necessarily be the same as what will happen in the Netherlands, or certainly what happens in the United States. Uh,
Exactly.
and I'm Australian, as you probably picked up, or I'm not American, but I live in America.
Mhm.
Uh, but we've done a lot of work ourselves outside of the United States, like for example in the Netherlands.
Mhm.
And I found our general psychometric model measuring natural enduring traits
Mhm.
has worked very well, particularly in financial services. At that first level of understanding that these people over here are more extroverted and spontaneous and will spend more money, and these types of people will take risk. At that general level, it's been a very good foundation and has worked well cross border. But that's not to saying that there isn't more to it, because of the cultural influence,
Exactly.
and the structure of markets as
Exactly.
well. So what about the um, Juan De Rus? What about the COM-B model? Because I found that interesting as well, having studied some of that from a slightly different lens from a book written by B.J. Fogg on tiny habits, talking about motivation, action, and prompts. And I think the COM-B model is in some ways bringing up the same 3 points, but with a slightly different structure. But and so yeah, so um, we ought to talk about that. But also the Airbnb. Sorry, I think I jumped over that. The Airbnb brought out a really interesting piece of research about the intrinsic motivation versus the extrinsic, and what might be more dominant.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. Yes, because I jumped to the
Yeah, we jumped to
concept of
something else, but
to the
which
country
motivation
issue.
but it's good to think it's good to understand, bring that point out.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. This is why I mentioned. No, coming back to the Airbnb example, we thought it was a really nice example of something that we take for granted in general. Now, in the case of Airbnb study, which is explained in the article, when you ask the hosts, about why they were doing, why they were being a host, or why did you start hosting? No, what was the specific question? Then they realized that there were things as enjoyment, purpose, self-fulfillment that were relevant for hosting somebody. And then there were, and I think this is important as well for what we are talking, some observable behaviors of these people that were intrinsically motivated. So they were longer descriptions or uploading more photos. So you say, hey, when they are having this behavior, it means that they are intrinsically motivated. And I think this is a very important point because in neoclassical economics, we have always considered that, we do have the stated preferences. If there is a stringent queue, we have whatever behavior. And in many, many occasions, the behavior of being a host here, it's probably not coming for the explicit reward, at least at the beginning. There are some intrinsic motivations that could explain this behavior. So this making we could make this reflection in many, many other occasions, and I can give you a couple of examples of recent research that we have done. One of them is with open banking. No, now we have a lot of entities trying clients here in Europe that you are trying that the client is giving you the access to all the financial information so you could advise them better. And we did a research that was done in Poland, Romania, Italy, and Spain, in which everybody was assuming if you want open banking from people, pay them. So because they will give you the data if you are giving them something, because this is an extrinsic motivation issue. And this is what we always think in almost all behaviors. If you want your employees to do better, pay them more. If you want them to give the open banking, pay them more. Exactly. We did the open banking analysis, and it is really interesting. We did the control and 4 interventions. One of them was, hey, I will pay you for giving the data. And this was the result of this intervention was even lower than the control group in this case. Why? Because there is no extrinsic motivation in this case, and not monetary motivation for giving the data. And even this monetary incentive was creating some kind of fear, suspicious, behind why you are asking the data and why you are paying me for this data. This
Yeah.
is very, very relevant. What are you going to do with this? The main motivation to give the data was more related to I will be able to give you, because this was in a collections agency. So it was I will be able to give you a better financial advice to help you pay your debts, and full transparency in what I'm gonna do with the data. No? So this is this example in which we do believe that when you want somebody to do something, just play with the extrinsic motivation issues, and you realize that in many, many, many behaviors, the intrinsic cues are much more relevant than these extrinsic
Yeah,
monetary
I think
incentives.
it's sort of in some ways, as I was listening to you talk and reflecting, it's like with employees, not, okay, employees come to work to get paid, and as long as they're paid enough money and it's fair, but whether they stay there or not is in most cases going to come down to values, how they're treated, and that's more of an intrinsic motivation. And I think it's the same, that at the end of the day, it's the same in a lot of other settings, as you're saying. Values for a lot of people is more important than the money, um, and that
Yeah, and
and that's driving a lot of decisions.
exactly. No, I like the concept, that of crowding out effect. No, that sometimes when we are intrinsically for example, we are working in blood donation as well. And I think this is another example in which experiments have shown us how you can break intrinsic motivation, sorry, when extrinsic motivation comes into play. And with blood donation, that people goes there because they have the intrinsic cues, they really want to help. And then when you introduce monetary incentives there, this intrinsic motivation is crowding out. And now you have less donation when you are trying to pay for it than when you were not paying. So, so for us, for me, it's a very, very important concept that we distinguish that when we are trying, to promote certain behaviors in order to donate blood, in order to do open banking, in order to pay your debts, we need to consider which is the role that intrinsic motivation is having in this behavior. Because when we include all these monetary incentives or monetary related incentives, we may kill this intrinsic motivation and the behavior is not going to happen. And this is something that as behavioral scientists, we may pay attention.
Yeah, and I think it's just taking us further down understanding the human psychology part rather than just raw data, because I think that the
Okay.
economics approach would be, well, it's just money is the motivator. And for some people, it is. It is very black and white, but for a lot, it's not. Well, and what about the COM-B model? I thought that was interesting as well, and I started to allude to that before. That that's another way of understanding motivation, and particularly we could say to clients in the digital health space. And you talked about you did a digital health coaching example. Two people could be disengaged, and without sort of going below the surface, we just make the same conclusion about them, but they could be disengaged for very different reasons.
Exactly. No, I think it is related to the previous point that in general, I think in consulting and in life, we like simple solutions. So we say, hey, they are disengaged. Probably we need to pay them, or we need to send them a message, and we don't fully understand which is the real diagnosis. This is why the combi analysis is really interesting for us. It's a motivational issue. It's an opportunity is based on capacity. And we use the example of the digital health because now in the artificial intelligence world that we may enter later on, we wanted to analyze whether when you are interacting with machines, uh, they may be more effective when they are understanding which are the motivational barriers that you are having. No, in the case of the digital case of advice, what it was studied is, hey, if somebody is telling you I'm not using it because I'm too busy, this is more related to opportunity, no, and the solution and the advice should be different. If they are saying, I don't feel like walking, that was another example, this is related to a low motivation. And the solutions are completely different. And
Very
this is
different.
what we don't always understand, that when you have a lack of capacity, it's a total different solution that when you have a lack of motivation. And we don't go into that diagnosis that far, which this is why we always insist on the combi model, even not only in the machines, well, when we are interacting with machine, but also with people. No, working we have worked a lot with financial institutions, and they say, hey, the employees are not selling, let's pay them more or let's train them, without knowing which is the real reason behind this
And
lack
the
of
other one in
sales.
there is the barriers or the prompts.
Exactly.
What's in the way of making the decision, or in fact something's there that's encouraging a certain choice to be made. Um, that also needs to be understood, and I think that just comes back to the point that we as humans are unique, and you can't make the same assumption
Exactly.
based on just raw data about two people. Um, so, uh, so what about, let's just, as we wrap up and spend the, sort of the next 10 minutes as we finish up, talking about, Juan De Rus, how we use technology now, because I think that technology is going to be our friend as behavioral scientists or in the field of behavioral economics to do more of this work than maybe could ever have been done before. And, I found your article interesting because this is something I've done, maybe in a different way, but it's understanding the sentiments of people and, if they make statements about something, whether it's verbally written, a quote, or in fact just said in a podcast, right? That you can draw conclusions based on the construction of the words. Um, so using the Shaptek type technique, AI now as well will help us decipher, even though someone said something pessimistic at the start, or gee, that was poor performing, but they hold hope for the future. Um, that there might be, you might see them as being over optimistic or in fact a risk taker.
Yeah. No, I think that we do have now with technology, and as I was saying at the beginning, we started analyzing calls in 2010 more or less, so 15 years ago, with speech mining tools in telco companies, banking, etc. With, as I was saying, I think we didn't have this behavioral science background, so we have a lot of information. I think we didn't know how to understand it. Now, we first of all, the capacity to be able to transcribe, or even now with AI, is even simple. All the conversations we are having, all the verbatims, we could have a much better understanding of this. The Sharp values example that we put there, we like, and we usually use Sharp because we think it's like an open box of what is happening and which is a contribution of each of these verbatims to whatever target variable we are having. And I could give some examples of how we have used these Sharp values for different objectives. For example, when if you are in a contact center who is trying to retain clients for living and the company, and you are having a very interesting conversation about which is the reason you are leaving, this is what is happening, there is a narrative of the client there, you could analyze all this huge amount of information and check, which are the patterns of conversation that are explaining somebody staying or somebody leaving. Because usually companies, what they are doing, okay, at the end when the client has left, I will ask them, why have you left? And then the client will build a narrative on, this is the reason why I'm leaving the company, and probably the narrative has I'm sure that in many occasions, nothing to do with the real reason of why you are leaving. But if you have the full picture, you have all these conversations, you may know, which are the patterns, of conversation. And even if you are able to analyze emotions in the sentiment analysis in the conversations, and you have a proper target variable as customer staying, customer buying, customer paying, whatever, you can understand, hey, these are the differential patterns of behavior in order to explain whatever future behavior we want to predict. And this is something that it seems simple when we explain it, but at least in my experience, there are many companies with this information, and even institutions, public institutions, without using it.
They're not using it.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think
at
this
all.
is where I think you've said it today in the podcast and then again in your article, but something that I'm very much encouraging organizations to do is to have an enterprise data warehouse where all of this data starts to get centralized in one place, because I'm seeing too often in organizations where it's all over the place. And, one set of data is collected in one area and people are hanging on to it. And then something else is somewhere else. And then there's 3 or 4 different CRM type technologies as well. And how do you bring it all together? But I think the point is the data is inside organizations to do this work, and it can be done, I think, relatively easily compared to the past because of AI.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and I think AI is our friend as behavioral scientists to now do work that we can really bring out much better conclusions that will be game changers for organizations
Yeah. Yeah.
and for a lower cost,
Exactly. Yeah. I
relatively
think
speaking. It may not be cheap totally doing it. I'm not saying this is going to cost $5, but the same, let's say $100,000 investments made by an organization in
yeah,
near-advanced services or at DNA behavior, the result out of that will be much, much higher, bigger, more impact, and relatively at a lower cost. We can 10x or 100x the result versus maybe 3x the result. Um, and
exactly.
spend and then and the spending time guessing. I think that's the difference that the AI is going to make, which will bring the field of behavioral economics along.
Exactly. Yeah, I think you are mentioning the capacity to scale up now will be huge, and today what we are doing at behavioral scientists, I think this we do, for example, a lot of training now. All the employees of the company, you should wear the behavioral science lens, and you should decide with some of these principles and remember that if an employee, a client, a collaborator is having this kind of behavior based on the combi, you should act this way. And we are training people in order to do this and in order to scale up. But imagine, if we are able to train artificial intelligence to know all these aspects that we are training people now. No? So now instead of training 20,000 employees on some of the behavioral aspects, you will train because this is important and this is something I would like to insist on. I think we still need to train AI in some of the behavioral science techniques because if we are prompting, and this is something that we have tested a lot, but when you prompt, hey, by the way, take into consideration the availability heuristic when you are communicating with the clients, for example. The result of AI today is poor, the one which is giving just with this specific prompt. What we need to do as behavioral scientists, and I think this is our future, is to explain properly to AI what availability heuristic is, why it's relevant, which is an example of availability heuristic,
Yeah.
test the different narratives, in the system, in the model, and then check which is the output. And this is crucial in our
Yeah,
work.
I think that we've all got to be conscious of that the AI has got to be trained properly. The prompts have got to be right. That's the only way you can get there. And the more, in a way, slightly like all projects, the more it's like delegation. I think the more upfront work's done and preparation, you're going to get
Okay.
better results through AI quicker. Eventually, the AI will get there, but we can accelerate the speed of getting accurate results by
Exactly.
by feeding it with the right things up front. And just to conclude on AI and data, Juan De Rus, what do you think about the ethics part of this as well? Because I think that people are going to get lost in what data should be going where and uh, who sees it. So there's sort of an ethics issue, I think, around the data and what gets revealed. I certainly with a person's name attached to it is a problem, as opposed to anonymized data is a different matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that when I discuss ethics with my students or with in some meetings with clients, I always say that we as behavioral scientists, or in order to avoid this bad manipulation, that you can do with data, there are two ways of doing this. One is regulation. That is not on our side, but you say, okay, there are some aspects of the regulation. GDPR, for example, in Europe, they say, hey, if you want to use artificial intelligence models, synthetic participants, you you need to meet, some of these requirements if you want to do it. Don't use real client data. You cannot use in order to damage the client, whatever. So there is this side of regulation that sometimes helps but it is really hard to regulate influence and the way you can use artificial intelligence now. So this is the first part. The second one is education. I think you, me, all people who are working here, we need to have some ethical aspects, ethical thresholds in what could be introduced in artificial intelligence in order to influence, which is the kind of data that we need to use here if we want to meet the influential aspects. So my point is, as today, when we are doing a human to human interaction, in our case, for example, Juan and Nevantas, we are having some ethical aspects that we need to meet. Hey, you cannot lie. You need to be transparent. Be careful with vulnerable population.
Yep.
It should be a win-win. You need to give elections, alternatives to the client, whatever. We need to translate this ethical threshold to the AI world and say, hey, when you are giving all this information to AI about availability heuristic, reciprocity principle, whatever biases that you are introducing there, please, you also need to explain AI that there are some approaches which are not meeting. I know this is hard. I don't know how to. This is something that probably is not easy to control, but we need to check as behavioral scientists as well, and I think we need to be the ones responsible of checking that the use of behavioral science by the system is meeting these ethical requirements that we are trying to meet as humans, no? And
Yeah,
I
I
know we
think
lose control, no? But
I think yes, I think that that inherently data is biased, and the humans that are feeding the data into AI are biased, and that's one level that needs to be managed. And then if we're going to continue to use choice architecture type models, and we've got behavioral data infused into that, how do we be transparent with people so that they know what's going on and getting explanations? And if they don't want to play the game, they can opt out. Um, or if we make an assessment of their personality, they can say, no, I don't agree, or whatever. And, I'm more like this, and something is done so that they are a participant in the process as well. So there's lots of dimensions here that we could go on about. But I think that what we've all just got to remember, and which you're bringing up, is that the ethical side of AI needs to be remembered.
yeah, there is some, for example, but just to give an example of some aspects that we could discuss here, whether they are meeting the ethical boundaries or not. No, imagine that there is a robbery in my neighborhood, and you have a commercial coming just an hour after the robbery and say, hey, I want to sell you an alarm, and you are in a vulnerable position, and you say, okay, I will buy it right now. Probably if we discuss this, I'm not sure whether we are meeting the ethical threshold that we would like, a behavioral scientist to take into consideration. You know that based on availability heuristic, this is a good moment to sell an alarm, but probably if we apply our ethical threshold, we will consider this a non-ethical approach, because you are getting advantage of this vulnerable moment. But if we explain availability heuristic to AI, and then AI is giving some arguments to the commercial force of whatever company. Probably when AI understands availability heuristic, probably it will suggest, please, if there has been a robbery recently, just go there a minute after the robbery and try to sell the alarm, because it's an application of availability heuristic, but it's not an ethical application of the availability heuristic. So what I do think is that we as behavioral scientists, we need to check that, okay, AI is understanding the concept, but the same we train our people to avoid these kind of approaches, we need to check whether AI is understanding the ethical approach of availability heuristic, not only the availability heuristic as a.
I think if technology is trained properly, the right data, we remove bias out of the data, we train the technology properly, being the AI, then we can overcome deficiencies in a overzealous salesperson handling that robbery situation, and trying to upsell, an alarm system. the wrong way. So technology could help us get further down the path to doing it properly, um, because also humans don't understand all the behavioral nuances either, and it's hard for them to be trained. So we need technology in a way to help with the training and in a way to surpass some of the training
Exactly.
because humans can't do it all. That's the barrier that I've come up against, in working with a lot of financial advisors. They'd love to be able to know more about the clients, but having to remember it all uh, and the different types is hard. But we can make that possible with behavioral type technology being built. Um, and so I think that's to me is where there's a great future um, in humanizing data.
Okay.
So just to wrap up, Juan De Rus, is there anything else you'd like to quickly share with our audience?
No, I would say I think we have just mentioned the future of behavioral science. That for sure, technology, will try to help us. I would add that there is something that we need to be aware soon, which is the agents to agents interactions. That is something that we do not think, but in the future, in the near future, you will have you an agent buying a plane ticket for you, and there will be an agent selling this flight ticket, to your agent. So how are we gonna regulate this interaction? Which one is gonna have some of these behavioral science principles more applied? Are they selling ethically or not? So I think there is something there that for sure we need to be aware of, and this is one. I think I would say one line that we need to think about it. The second one, all this behavioral data conversation that we have had, I think we have a lot of room for improvement there. Even with the data we have, we need to convince organizations that they need to read this data with behavioral lens, and this is very important. And I would add a third one that I think we still, as behavioral scientists, have some room for improvement as well, which are dynamics models of behavior. Something that I have always seen in behavioral science is that we do one-shot analysis and we check how availability heuristic is impacting, this population versus a control group. But what if I have been exposed to availability heuristic before, and then you are making a second impact to me, or a third one, or a fourth one? I think we still have room to do more longitudinal studies and understanding how we are evolving towards these motivations, these behavioral science principles, when we have been impacted before and before and before. And I think
Yeah.
this is
So
something.
really, at the end of the
Mhm.
day, I think you made the point in the article. A lot of studies are very temporal,
Exactly.
um, and what we're picking up is yes, it's a motivation and it's a preference at that time, but would it always be a preference if the person's circumstances change? And that's where I've been doing a lot of work myself over for the last 20 plus years on what are the enduring traits of the person, because I believe they show up when they're under pressure, and that's what you get to see more consistently. But that doesn't mean the person won't decide outside of that framework in particular settings. So it's all of it together we need to understand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, Juan. Well, it's been fantastic spending time with you.
It has been the same, Hugh. Thank you very much for having me here.